My name is Elena Morales, and I am 33 years old. For as long as I can remember, my family treated me like the person who did the work no one wanted to acknowledge, always invisible until there was a task to be done. For 12 years, they introduced me at gatherings as the one who helps around the house, while I signed contracts that put people on payroll and kept small teams afloat. The sentence that should stop this story comes right now. I will tell you why. I was folding a suit at midnight when the call arrived, and why the rest of the world ended up calling me indispensable. If you like stories where someone chooses themselves and justice shows up later, tap like and subscribe. I read every comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Tell me in the comments. I love knowing the places that hold these conversations. Now, let me take you back to that evening, the one before everything shifted. I had my passport on the kitchen counter, the light thin through the blinds, and the smell of coffee still in the mug from an early conference call, when my mother called and said simply, "Elena, you will cook for tomorrow." And that was the start of the choice. My childhood looked ordinary until you pay attention to the small repetitive things. The crumbs always wiped by my hands, the curtains ironed by my arms, the plate returned to the cabinet without a thank you. I was the one who learned to make two kinds of empanadas by age 9 because my grandmother insisted I could help the household and because my father believed competence was a kind of duty. At school, I learned to speak up, and I learned a different language. At home, the language of service. There were afternoons I would come home from university to find my room turned into a storage closet for linens and party decorations. And the first time I said something, the reply had a tone I knew too well. "You are dramatic. Stop being difficult." I worked nights freelancing for small events to pay rent, working spreadsheets on a tiny laptop with a coffee stain that never came off. Those years taught me discipline and how to pitch to a client in the middle of the night, but also how to swallow a humiliation and nod. A list comes to mind of the repetitive humiliations I carried: being asked to bring plates at the precise moment of applause, being spoken over by cousins who introduced me as the helper, being handed a menu to choose for guests, while my ideas for my business were dismissed as hobbies. The smells that marked those seasons were grease from a cramped kitchen, the antiseptic of a community center where I pitched my first proposals, the metallic tang of airport coffee, and the chalky dust of an old office where I first. The textures my hands remember are cardboard stack folders worn at the edges, a cheap blazer that got me through interviews, and the soft, worn handle of a rolling suitcase that would later carry a contract worth more than we expected. The sounds that tracked me were laughter at family barbecues that never included me in conversation, the tap of keys in the night, and the muffled hum of strangers congratulating each other on ideas I had ghostwritten. These details are small, but they stack and become the shape of an identity someone else decides for you. I will pause here because I know many of you recognize this feeling of being useful and not celebrated. I want to hear from you. If you have chosen work over pleasing family or felt invisible at home, please write in the comments. Start your line with the word "chose" and then in one sentence say why you made that choice. For example, "Chose because my work feeds my children and taught me discipline." I will read them all, and I promise your short line will be seen. Your comment will remind someone else that they are not alone. This space becomes stronger when we know the distribution of stories. The small acknowledgments become public, and they help others draw a line where they need to draw it. Now, back to that night when the phone call arrived and I had to decide. It was the eve of a key meeting, one that had been months in the making. A multinational hospitality chain executive was due to fly in, and my team had prepared a proposal that would secure a pilot contract for us and potentially double our revenue for the next year. I had the boarding pass in my email and the itinerary on my kitchen table when the call came from my mother, her voice pitched urgent and non-negotiable. She said, "Elena, my sister Sophie is hosting guests tomorrow and she needs you to run everything. You will cancel your trip, you will help," and the way she said it made clear there was no question. Our dialogue started small and then escalated into the familiar scripts that had cost me years. I remember the exchanges clearly, in the kitchen light, me folding my blazer, and her voice like a hinge that would not allow me to close. "Mom, please, this is the meeting that could change everything." Elena, she did not pause. It is only for a few hours. You can come back. I have plans and I need someone reliable. There's no one else. I said, I have a flight at 8 in the morning and a presentation to run. She replied, you always put work before family, and that has to stop. Those words landed like plates shattering on the tile. I answered, you have no right to make this choice for me. And she said, we give you a place to live. Remember who you are. I said, I am not your employee. I am your daughter. And then we both fell silent on the line. The silence that follows when a pattern repeats itself and a decision sharkens inside you was almost audible. I put my phone down and I looked at the blazer, and then I looked at the passport. The choice I made in that silence was to leave the house at dawn and keep the meeting. I packed a bag with the texture of resolve. The morning was a rush of sensory impressions: bright fluorescent lights at the airport, the metallic taste of a sandwich eaten standing, the apprehension that comes when you are carrying other people's hopeful futures in a briefcase. My assistant Marco texted me a route. I printed the slides and sent a terse email to the client confirming the time and place. On the plane, I rehearsed lines in my head like prayers. I wanted to be both calm and persuasive. When I arrived in the city, the hotel lobby smelled of polished wood and lemon hand soap. The bellman took my single bag, and the receptionist asked if I wanted a late checkout. I said, not unless we get that meeting done. Then she smiled with the kind of worn politeness that hospitality people learn, and I headed to the conference room. The coincidence that turned possibility into something else felt like fate, but was really a string of small overlooked facts. In the guest list for the gala my sister was hosting at our family house that night, there was a name that should have meant nothing to me, except that it mattered. The name was David Blake, CEO of Silverline Hospitality, the very company I was pitching in the same week. I had seen his profile in a trade magazine and assumed he would be in New York for a different conference. Yet an event coordinator for a client I have helped years earlier mentioned casually he was friends with a family friend, and that set off a chain I did not anticipate. When I realized there was a chance he might attend my sister's dinner, the hair on my arms rose with the kind of electricity that comes when two storylines converge. The discovery came from an email thread I almost deleted, a forwarded invitation with a guest list attached. The words David Blake, CEO, in a neat column, as if someone had written an invitation to trouble. I felt a punch of something between dread and hope, because the same man who could validate our proposal could also make my family dynamic public in a way I could not control. That night at our family house unfolded into a sequence I will never forget. The kitchen was hot and humid, with the smell of reheated sauce and cheap takeout, mingled with the faint perfume of my sister and the clink of crystal that had been shipped in for the evening. I will render this scene with the kind of detail you can taste the guest's arrival: the shuffle of shoes on tile, the metallic ring of a wine opener, the slapping of a pizza box onto a side table as the catering failed and someone suggested ordering delivery. The dialogue that followed was rapid and crowded, and I will reproduce it, because the words matter and the exchanges shifted the room. Sophie, what happened with the caterer? She said nervously. We had a mix-up with the chef. That should not have happened, my mother said. No one knows why you would book last minute. It is fine, Elena. Just make sure the plates are warm, my mother said. Do not make a fuss. You will do as I asked. I replied, I cannot. I have a meeting. I have to leave. Tonight you will stay and help, she said. You will not. You are leaving tonight, I said, raising my voice. Do not you dare speak to me like that, my mother retorted. The guests are arriving. I will have you answer the door, my sister said, as if announcing a new duty. Elena, why are you being difficult? My Aunt Rosa intervened quietly, as a kind of social referee. She will not be difficult, she said to my cousin Ethan, who laughed and said, always the caretaker, even when she is the one stepping into a boardroom. I remember the sound of glass, cutlery clinking, the murmurs picking up momentum like a tide, and then the pizza that someone opened and put on porcelain plates as a joke, while a waiter in an expensive suit apologized for the mix-up. The image of pizza served on fine china has circulated online since that night because it reveals a dissonance that is cinematic, an image where pretension and neglect live in the same frame. The humiliation was layered. It was the forced smile I gave while being handed bread plates, the way a guest called my name and asked for more sauce as if I were the caterer and not the person they barely knew. The air tasted of tomato and embarrassment, and the sound of chatter included sighs and a soft conversation between two women about a promotion at work that was never meant for someone like me. The next day, the meeting came and went, and the universe moved faster than gossip. At the conference table, there were 8 to 10 exchanges that mattered between me and the executive team of Silverline Hospitality, because this moment was not small. It was a negotiation that needed proof. I had prepared a presentation, and I had confidence, and in my bag was a prototype of a service package and a printed contract ready for signature. The dialogue was brisk and focused. Let me write some of it as it happened. David Blake said, "We are interested. Tell us about logistics." I answered, "Our model is scalable and we can start a pilot in 3 cities," he asked. "What about staffing?" I explained our training system. Marco chimed in with numbers. And then Maya, the PR consultant from our firm, asked about guest experience, and David nodded. He leaned back and said, "Elena, you have thought this through," he said. Then quietly, "We sponsor a lot of small firms. We have an interest in practical leadership." I felt my heartbeat and waited for the line that would change things. He said, "Would you consider signing a pilot contract today?" I looked at Marco, who slid the contract across the table, and I felt the paper cool in my hands. The signature was an act that had practical consequence. It translated into payroll. It translated into hiring a young manager I had mentored. It meant I could officially stop being the invisible one to our own clients and employees. When David Blake, the CEO, stood up, he did something I did not expect. He placed a hand flat over the contract and bowed slightly and said, "In a room where people often do not see the work that matters, you have my respect," and called me, "Elena, you are the boss," in a tone that made some of the executives laugh and others shift uncomfortably. It was one of those tiny reversals that carries weight because a public acknowledgement from the right person reframes a history. When the post went up, the story spread in ways I could not have planned. A photo of my signature next to David Blake sitting at the head of a conference table with a low-lit corporate backdrop circulated on LinkedIn with comments from industry leaders praising our model and inviting interviews. A feature appeared in an industry outlet. One of our partners sent a screenshot, and the word Forbes came up in a message from an old mentor who said, "Congratulations," and asked if he could share our story. Simultaneously, the family reaction was vivid and varied. My sister Sophie messaged that she felt blindsided. My mother called asking if I could come over to talk, and my father George tried to mediate, saying we could meet in person. In the public sphere, our business grew. Our website traffic tripled. The PR team, led by Maya Patel, handled inquiries, and our contract with Silverline represented a concrete validation and a revenue projection that allowed me to hire Antonio as head chef, Marco as operations manager, and Caroline Ross, who had been an investor friend, to advise on scaling. I named those people not to boast, but to anchor the shift in reality. Names matter. They became the community that amplified the work I had been doing. In parallel, the family lost some of its social gloss. Guests who had once shown up started to distance themselves after the viral piece highlighted an image of our relatives serving pizza on fine china, a friction that led to whispers among old acquaintances, and a reconsideration of how the household presented itself publicly. The moment of public revelation created a tension in the private that I will describe in 2 compact paragraphs that carry weight, each of them. A slow burn of feeling, the first showing how consequences landed in the small hours. For 5 nights after the article, I received calls from people I had not heard from in years, people offering congratulations and offers to collaborate, and donors wanting to sponsor community initiatives. Many of these calls came early in the morning and left me dizzy with possibility, but also raw with the memory of a house where I had been asked to disappear. The second paragraph, on tension, is about the family conversation that followed, where we sat at the kitchen table under a single lamp and enumerated terms that would govern our future interactions. My mother spoke first. She said names are not everything and that we needed to reconcile. And I said, I will not be anyone's unpaid staff anymore. I said I will attend family events on my terms, and then listed the conditions I needed for my dignity to be preserved. I wanted public acknowledgement for the work I had done. If the relatives spoke of my contributions, it needed to be in the open. I asked for a budget to be contributed if they wanted me to manage meals, and that we hire catering professionals rather than expecting me to volunteer. And I requested that any use of my labor be compensated financially or in clear reciprocation. That conversation was tense and lasted hours, and was the first time we used language that separated the past from our new present. The repercussions were not only social, they were practical. Within 3 months, our pilot with Silverline turned into a regional contract, and we hired 20 people in operations and culinary services. The PR campaign run by Maya brought a steady stream of leads, and the Forbes-like attention meant other executives called to invite collaboration. One was Caroline Ross, who moved from advisor to investor and offered a line of credit that allowed us to expand into another city. My life changed financially too. We signed a contract that secured payroll, and I regained the freedom to set terms for work and life. For the family, the consequences varied. Some relationships warmed and others remained cool. My mother, Linda, apologized with a public note that acknowledged she had not seen how much I had done. And my sister Sophie sent a message that was part apology and part explanation about social pressure and insecurity. My father, George, who had been quiet through it all, reached out and asked to meet, and we negotiated boundaries. We set terms contractual in tone that felt awkward and necessary. We agreed on respect at family events, public acknowledgement when I contributed my time, and a rule that any labor from me would be compensated either monetarily or with clear reciprocation. Reciprocity. These terms sounded transactional, but they created a framework that stopped old scripts from replaying. 1 month later, the office was busier, and my mornings were scheduled with onboarding sessions. 3 months later, we had a measurable growth metric, revenue up 32%, and a retention rate that surprised our original forecasts. Which is to say, the external validation was not a one-time fluke. It was the engine for sustainable expansion. 6 months from that night, our company had a formal partnership in place, and we had hired a head of operations, Marco, and a PR lead, Maya. We were named in a trade feature, and the kind of attention that brings both praise and scrutiny arrived. In terms of family, the 6-month mark saw a quieter table at our parents' house. Our gatherings were shorter but more honest, and there were boundaries that allowed me to visit without being asked to be the unpaid staff. The epilogue of the story is not a tidy revenge. It is a reweaving of relationships with terms and consequences. 1 month later, I had a small celebration at the office where we toasted the signed contract, and I walked into a space where people called out my name with appreciation. The physical sensation of being seen felt like warm light on my shoulders. 3 months in, I had funds to sponsor a community kitchen program, and I hired a cousin who had always had talent but no outlet. She worked as a junior coordinator, and our success created a ripple that paid back into the network that had once underestimated me. 6 months later, I sat across from my mother at a lunchtime meeting at a neutral cafe, and we read aloud the terms we had agreed on, and we signed them like a compact. We acknowledged therapy as part of our reconnection, and we both laughed at the absurdity of needing a written list to manage emotions, but also recognized its necessity. The conditions we set were concise, public acknowledgement when appropriate, a stipend if I was asked to work on family events, a commitment to outsource large-scale catering, and the agreement that when I declined to perform a task, I would not be shamed. Over time, these practices hardened into habits, and they protected me from old patterns while allowing selective reconnection on healthier terms. I chose myself that night when I picked up my passport instead of a serving tray, and the decision changed the axis of many things. The practical consequence was a contract and the means to employ people who depended on that revenue. The emotional consequence was a reclaiming of dignity. The family consequences required negotiation and honest work, and they did not end with fireworks. They ended with paperwork and therapy sessions, and slow apologies that sometimes landed and sometimes did not. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that choosing yourself does not suffer. Make you selfish, it makes you solvent, and it makes you visible. If you want more stories about how to turn talent into business, sign up and join our community, where we break down the practical steps from pitch to contract and celebrate the messy parts that lead to growth. Remember the short rule I learned: know your worth, and then add a service fee, and then add tax.